This is very exciting. I feel like I'm like on location, like a journalist.
Yeah. It's like you're a student reporter.
Yeah. Let's
Right.
get started.
Okay, go ahead.
So do you want to screen share here?
I can do that. So go ahead and keep talking, and I can upload it.
Great. So as we mentioned before, today the webinar that we're doing is co-sponsored by CrowdPack, which is one of our partnering organizations. Before I get into who CrowdPack is, I want to give it just a little bit intro to who we are. So many of you know, you're kind of folks who are kind of in our orbit. We are Lincoln Deployed. We are a digital consultancy focused on servicing nonprofits and cause-focused organizations. Most of us on the Lincoln Deployed side are ex-startup folks. We've either been founders or entrepreneurs of our own companies. We've also started the company in roughly around 2016, mainly to focus on helping nonprofits. We also do some work with for-profit companies and entities, which is spaces we're always very familiar with. But our entire mission is to help build capacity among folks that are doing great things and help them better build a digital presence. So our door's always open. We have a lot of great content online. You go on our site, telegraph.joinlincoln.org, and you can begin to see some of that. So if you go to our website, a lot of the content that you'll see here today will be posted as well on our social channels. And the other organization that we've co-sponsored here with CrowdPack, if you want to go 2 slides forward, Aaron. So CrowdPack, as you can see here, is an independent, nonpartisan crowdfunding platform for politics that's aimed at helping citizens run for office and take political action. So effectively, CrowdPack is kind of the Silicon Valley or technology answer to large lobbying. It's made to democratize lobbying in many ways. So CrowdPack's mission is to give politics back to the people, to make it easier for citizens to learn about their politicians, run for office, and find support for political candidates that match their political beliefs. So crowdpack.com, check it out. They do a lot of really cool stuff. There's very few companies in Silicon Valley with virtuous missions like they have, so it's definitely worth being aware of them and checking out their stuff. So thank you very much for co-sponsoring, guys. So let's go forward. So disclaimer before we get into everything. So obviously today we're walking through all the major things that we see nonprofits do, not necessarily well in many cases when it comes to web design, but we love you guys. We love everyone, and that's why we do this stuff. That's why we want to educate the market to kind of uncover some of the major mistakes that hopefully fewer people will make them because they'll be more aware of them. So there's a lot of room for improvement. We're going to go over a bunch of things today, but the process of web design and the reason that we do it is it's all about telling a story. So all these things that we're getting folks to do better is all about telling their story and ideally motivating action. So those are going to be 2 recurring themes that you hear throughout the 10. So without further ado, let's do the 10. So number 1, the number 1 thing that we see, and this is as simple as they get, that nonprofits don't do very well, is they don't clearly explain things. They don't explain who they are and why they're there. So if I go to their site, there may be beautiful imagery, there may be really nice branding, they may have lots of content, but I have to decode and understand as a user exactly what they do. There isn't a plain language explanation. So the first thing that we typically do when we're doing web design projects for clients is just plainly explain, like a friend to a bar, like a friend in a bar, sorry, a friend, like you're talking to a friend in a bar, how would you explain what you do? So we are the leading organization for young conservatives coming out of college. We are an organization that helps get homeless folks in permanent living conditions. We often have a tendency to want to church things up, as they say, or make them a little bit too fancy. And as a result, we end up getting really confusing and use lots of semantics and buzzwords. So stay away from those. Keep it as plain as possible. Imagine it's a casual conversation. That's number 1. I'm going to readjust my video here. So number 2, poorly defined audience. So one of the key things in web design is, number 1, knowing who you're designing for. So in many cases, there are folks who've created nonprofits who have a really good understanding of who their audience is, but when they get around to actually creating a website, they don't design it for their major use case. So if I am, for example, a nonprofit that's helping incarcerated felons reintegrate into society and learn how to better create a kind of productive life, so to speak, in that situation, I need to define exactly who's coming to my site, why they're coming, what are the major use cases, and then provide action paths for them. So remember, who are people coming to your site and why are they there? And that's the basis for every UX decision that you make, or user experience decision. So the lens through which you view all of your design decisions, your branding, your calls to action, everything should be for this one thing. It's amazing how infrequently nonprofits sit down and just say, who's coming to the site and why? Are they looking for an event? Are they coming to the site after coming to an event? Those are 2 very different use cases, and you have to plan for them. Number 3, lack of clear CTA paths. So CTA is a good acronym a good $5 acronym for the day, that's call to action. So if I'm on a site buying a t-shirt, and there's the t-shirt and I can select my size, there's a big button that says add to my shopping cart or buy now with one click. That is a CTA, a click-through action. A lot of folks, a lot of nonprofits that we work with on the homepage, on all their major category pages, don't have clear CTA paths. So imagine you understand who your users are and why they're there. You want to give them that action top of mind, because the longer they're on that page without taking that action, the less likely it's going to be that they take it. So that's why we want all those CTAs to generally be as high above the fold as possible, meaning when the page loads, let's say on your web browser, everything that I see above having to scroll down, that's above the fold. There should be a clear value proposition and a CTA there. Now, another thing on CTAs is that it's not just enough to have a button, but you have to build an implicit expectation of value associated with that button. So I want someone to actually take this action. I need to make it sound valuable before I'm actually putting the action in front of them. And that's why a lot of landing pages for organizations, or kind of pages that they drive traffic to for an event, don't convert very well, because they're not building an implicit expectation of value when someone clicks that button. So you have to very clearly and quickly sell why they're clicking it and then present that button all in first view. It's difficult to do. It's an act in reduction, but it's very, very important. Number 4, many nonprofits are optimizing for too many things at the same time. Sites are often a melange of competing schizophrenic priorities. I love that sentence. It's a melange of competing schizophrenic priorities. The organization has a million things that they want to accomplish, and they're trying to jam all of it above the fold. But the problem there is that when there are too many things, people end up getting lost. They get distracted. They don't end up being focused on the things that matter. So focus is the word of the day. Imagine if your users are in a hurry. One of the things that we talk about frequently in UX design is a moron in a hurry test, or a 5-second test. If someone is in a hurry and they don't really care about your organization too deeply, or they aren't that aware of it because they haven't had a chance to care about it yet, what are they going to get from it almost immediately in 5 seconds? So often, and I'll talk about this a little bit more later, we'll run 5-second tests with pages where there's user experience testing sites online where we can show a 5-second screenshot of a page and then flash it in front of an uninitiated user who has no idea what we do. If in 5 seconds that page goes away, then we ask them, what was that page about? What were you supposed to do? If they can't clearly answer that question, then it's an ultimate fail. So that's one of the low bars, that first test that we run with a lot of our clients, just to see how it performs in the lowest common denominator situation. So to give you another concrete example of this, often on pages we'll see, in the footer, and your site may be guilty of this, having links to Facebook, Twitter, Pinterest, YouTube, Dig, Reddit, email, a million other things. But in reality, how many of those are you actively managing as an organization? Just having them there is actually not good, because it distracts away from channels that you want to focus on. So we typically tell organizations, focus on 1, maybe 2 social channels tops. Don't have 5, 6, 7, 8. People aren't going to use them and you can't manage them, even if you're large and have a big team. So another good example of that in the next slide here is a classic one that I have when I teach UX design. So I teach classes here in San Francisco and in DC in this stuff. And one of the great examples that I'd like to pull out was the difference between Taxi Magic and Uber. So I don't know how many of you were aware of Taxi Magic back in the day, but they were a predecessor to Uber, where you could hail a taxi. Everyone thought Uber was an incredibly innovative company, but there were actually multiple companies doing almost exactly what Uber did. But the beauty of Uber is the difference between these two screens. Uber's on the right. So on the left, you see Taxi Magic that had layered all kinds of data and all kinds of things on top of all I wanted to do was hail a cab. They added Foursquare recommended locations in the area, recents and favorites, and all these other things. Uber was pick the car you want and call the car. That's it. Now, Uber's added things over time, but it's still very simple, very visceral, very quick. So you want to optimize for a very small number of things. Otherwise, you can go the direction of Taxi Magic, which is you end up losing a lot of your customers to someone who has a better, simple, more articulated value proposition. So number 5, lack of basic web analytics. This is a requisite. So if you have Google Analytics in your site, good for you. That's a great first start. Google Analytics is free. All it is a line of JavaScript that gets put in the header of a web page, copy and paste, and then you're basically up and running, beginning to get data in Google, which you can view. Many nonprofits that we work with have absolutely no idea how many people come to their site, what pages they're using, how popular those pages are, and even if they do have it, they're not measuring those things or looking at them on a regular basis. And if that's the case, you're really flying blind. You don't know if you're winning or losing. You don't know if the content you're creating is working or if the fact that you're not creating content is hurting you. You don't know if people are coming to your event pages on the site after the event, before the event. You don't know how many of your users are new versus returning, which is a big determinant in what types of things I want them to see. So as an example, if most of my users are new users, that means that I want a new user onboarding flow on the site potentially. I may want a little modal that pops up when someone comes to the homepage, which is now gauche. Google doesn't like that, or a chiclet at the bottom. It says, hey, like sign up for our newsletter. You're a new person. Learn more about what we do. I may want to upsell them to another action. If they're a returning user, I may not want that. So I may make decisions based on my web analytics. And if I don't have them, again, I'm flying blind. So that's a very big one. So number six. Number six is one that I know that nonprofits, for the most part, are very aware of, but are still suffering from greatly, which is a lack of overall mobile optimization and mobile compatibility. So most of the sites that we work with have roughly 60% of their traffic on mobile. And that's kind of true for most internet sites generally, especially if you have a younger audience. If your audience tends to skew older, meaning north of 55, you may end up having a little bit more web usage relative to mobile. But imagine mobile is going to be somewhere between 40 to 60% of your traffic or higher. So in that situation, you need to be able to optimize for that. So if people are coming to your site and it doesn't load well on mobile, it's kind of messed up and the site organization is an absolute mess, that's going to dramatically affect your site performance. So again, having a basic responsive web grid or grid layout for the site that accommodates a mobile use case is great. Now, if you get further down this rabbit hole and you're beginning to do really advanced mobile optimization, we typically say pick for the top couple devices in the market and optimize and just test on those. So if you go into your web browser today, if you're using Chrome or Firefox, you can actually view your site as though you are a mobile device. And you can select from different Android and iOS mobile devices right in there. So if you go to the inspector or kind of the developer console, all those tools are available to you. And you can do a quick Google search or YouTube video of how to actually access them. But today you can immediately see how your site formats on every major mobile platform, including iPads. And I would recommend you do that. Because again, if you don't do that well, you're effectively alienating users and losing opportunities because your site is unusable when they come to it. If they come on mobile and it doesn't work out, they're not super likely to come back to your site on web. They're just going to have a bad experience and you'll likely lose them. Number seven. So number seven is not honoring UX conventions. So even in situations where nonprofits have significant web resources or the ability to pay for an external contractor to fix things for them, they end up sometimes over-designing things. And the key thing here to learn is that the world loves innovation, but it won't pay for it, especially when it comes to web design. So if you have weird scroll bars or confusing gallery controls where I'm going through like weird image things or like self-time this or I'm getting fancy, I begin to alienate folks because that's not honoring user expectation. People know what to do when they see a list of content and they can scroll through it. They know what to do when there's like a little radio button or a checkbox. If I begin to use those conventions incorrectly, I begin to diminish the overall value of the site. So again, not honoring UX conventions, even especially leading nonprofits, ones that have seemingly unlimited resources, are the worst offenders of this particular one of the 10. They do way too many weird things. Number 8. So this is one area where we help a lot of our clients specifically is they have picked the wrong vendor. So in many cases, that means exorbitant design and implementation fees. So we'll have nonprofits getting charged enormous sums of money, well in excess of $60,000, $70,000 for very basic WordPress sites or similar WordPress sites. And then on top of that, those contractors are giving them expensive hosting on top of that. So they'll say, okay, well, it's going to be another like, $300 to $500 a month for hosting. That's a ripoff. Even if it's a very small amount of money, hosting should be effectively free. You can self-host, which I would recommend you do anyway, so that the actual company is not owning your source code. And that's another huge one. So in a lot of cases, if you get your site built externally by a vendor, they will own the code to your site. So any change that you want made has to go through the vendor and they can charge you for additional work or charge you for existing service agreements. So they just are on call if you want changes. In my opinion, that's a ripoff. With our clients, one thing that we do is give them access to the source code, give them a content management system like WordPress where they can make changes to the site without needing us at all. You should find a vendor that does that. Even if it's not us, it should be someone who doesn't own your source code. And lastly, a lot of vendors are famous for really long lead times when it comes to changes to a site. So a basic change or like updating content taking weeks or months, forget about it. That's the wrong vendor. They put the B squad, the JV team doing your work. It's time to consider a new vendor. Let's go to number 9. So number 9, premature optimization. One of my favorite things, one of my favorite business buzz terms. In a lot of cases, organizations will build a site for the organization and the audience that they want, as opposed to the organization or the audience they have. Now, this links very closely up to number 2, which is the poorly defined audience. But in that situation, this is slightly different. They're building really heavy functionality or expensive things or complex things that aren't really needed. So often we'll talk to nonprofits that'll say, well, we have events and we want to create like an online registration portal where people can log in and they can remember them and they can have a list of all their things, the events that they've gone to in the past. And then we ask the question, well, is that really needed? Does that add significant value to their experience? Does that help you achieve your strategic goals? It may be a very expensive piece of technology that may make an immediate problem better, but does that create more long-term problems because then you're servicing a larger, more expensive, more complex code base? So again, in addition to knowing your audience, you want to be very targeted in what you're building. You want to solve for immediate problems with that larger strategic vision in mind. But good companies, and this is extremely important, good companies of all kinds solve for immediate problems for a small, continuous group of people first. Good companies solve for an immediate problem for a small and continuous group of people first. They're not solving for the entire market. Every startup that I've ever worked at or advised or helped invest in, anyone that has tried out to hit the larger mass market has always failed. The companies that are successful always pick a small market first, a small targeted use case. Facebook is a great example of that. Facebook didn't start off going for all the billions of people in the world. They started off with one college, and you had to have a .edu email address to get in it. And the features at Facebook were very different at the time. It was about what your class schedule was and finding other people that you could meet up with and share notes with and things like that. They didn't even have photo sharing. They didn't even have status updates at that point. It was a very small and targeted use case for a small number of organizations. They eventually expanded over time to more schools and then opened it up to the rest of the world, but they started small. Consider the same with your organization. Who is the audience you are serving? How do you build as little as possible and achieve their goals? That's huge. So lastly, number 10, and this is one of my favorites. Beauty does not equal good design. It just doesn't. Don't over design. I don't know if anyone has ever seen the Twitter mocks, and I think it's on the next slide, Aaron. So this is the first, and this is fascinating, this is the first version of Twitter. This is what Twitter looked like before today. When they launched Twitter, it was ugly as sin, absolutely terrible. And all it had was a basic text entry form and like one long massive feed of tweets that people were putting out, and they ate it up. They solved a specific weird problem that a small group of people had, and then later added all kinds of things as Twitter grew. And actually, in reality, this is another bonus onto the 11 for good product strategy. Twitter didn't invent most of the features that they have today. Hashtags were invented by users. It took Twitter over a year to figure out that users were using hashtags to reference conversations. Twitter didn't overbuild at the beginning. They kept it as simple as possible. And the other great example is on the next slide, which is Reddit. Reddit is, again, ugly as sin. But one of the reasons that Reddit has succeeded and kept the industry leading spot that it has is because it's incredibly simple and the UX informs people's understanding of what they're looking at. It doesn't have to be beautiful. If Reddit was beautiful, it would cease to be Reddit. The fact that it looks rough and looks like a mess, but is very utilitarian and answers the need for the people that use it makes it so effective. So don't get confused that beauty equals good design. A designer coming forward and coming up with beautiful mocks is really not that important. So when you are going through your web design process for your site, consider focusing on things like information architecture, another really good buzzword for the day. That's the layout and sequencing of information inside your site. What are the top global navigation elements that are on the top of your site? What are the flows that we want people to go through as they go through the application? So again, focus very heavily on information architecture. So now that we've gone through the 10 things, let's talk through how we can fix a couple of these things. So number one, and this is part of the secret sauce of the things that Lincoln does when we are engaging with clients. And again, we're comfortable opening up all of our processes because we want people to do this better. Our entire mission is to help educate the market and make folks make better websites. So the first thing we do, and anyone who's done a consulting project with us will remember this fondly, is we prioritize the actions you want users to take. So if the purpose of your website is to communicate value and to motivate action, what are those actions that we're motivating? It sounds banal, but it's something that people very rarely do when they're starting a web design process. What are the 3 most important things in order that you want people to do on your entire website? And then go through each page and do that again. So as far as the entire site, what are the things I want them to do? I want them to sign up for the newsletter. I want them to donate to our organization. I want them to come to an event. Those are the 3 most important things. Yours could be totally different. It depends on the organization and your strategy. But you pick those three things, and then you make sure that everything inside the site is, again, evaluated through the filter of those three things. So first do it site-wide, and then do it for every page. Number two, focus heavily above the fold on the homepage first. So imagine that your site is nothing more than what's above the fold on the homepage, which for the vast majority of people that will come to your site, and I'm going to guarantee this without even looking at your web analytics, that's going to be the case. Above the fold on the homepage is the most important part of your site. That, for most organizations, is where the battle is won or lost. That's where people make the decision of whether or not they want to look at events or opportunities or donating or signing up for your newsletter. But that above the fold section is huge. So that's why you see in many sites and landing pages a big, beautiful image, a plain language explanation of what you're looking to do or what the organization is, and then a call to action that is the next step. Plain language explanations are huge. One call to action tops. Really simple. Next, good design is an act in reduction. Leonardo da Vinci said something close to that, which is simplicity is the ultimate sophistication. I think it was him. Very, very similar in web design. Avoid paradox of choice. That means the more choices I have, the less happy I am. And the classic example there is toothpaste buying when I go to the drugstore. If I wanted to buy toothpaste 100 years ago, I go in, assuming that the place that I'm going has toothpaste, and they have like two flavors, mint and mint. And I choose which one I like, Crest or Colgate. Now, if I go in there, it's basically like choosing, you know, the type of financing I want for my company or like some incredibly complicated choice. There's a million things. And I look at it and it makes me overall unhappy because there's just too much going on. So, paradox of choice. Happiness is focus and clarity of purpose. Give your users that. Give your audience and your community that clarity of purpose. And it starts with knowing who they are. Start with the global navigation and go through each page. So if you're auditing your current site, look at the top area of the nav. If you have Google Analytics, look at the traffic distribution on those pages. And I guarantee you that at least one of those things is probably going to have a very low amount of appreciable traffic. And then ask yourself the question, does it need to be there? Can I remove that and concentrate focus on 4 things instead of 5 things, or 2 things instead of 6 things? What's really important? Everything on your site should fight for a reason to exist. It should have to defend its existence all the time. So a good example of this are e-commerce flows. So e-commerce flows, meaning checkouts for like in-store purchases online, are some of the most well-optimized parts of web design in total. So if I go on Amazon or I go through, Amazon's actually a great example. Amazon has done everything they can do to simplify the process to checking out. And it's laughable at this point. One-click shopping. I don't even need to enter my address or enter my credit card information. It's already there. All I have to do is click that button. And then further, they give me immediate gratification by shipping it that day through their mobile inventory. They've made everything as simple and as painless and as frictionless as possible. When I teach designers and I run shops for designers at different funds like marketing agencies and companies, things like that, one of the things that we do as a capstone after I've taught them all the theory is a defend your design session, where we'll get everybody together in a room, we'll put up their designs on a board, and we'll say, okay, I want you to defend every single thing on this page if you're designing a website or a mobile application. Why is everything there? And I'll question everything mercilessly. Well, why is that there? Well, why can't they get that somewhere else? Well, why does it have to be here? What do you know about the user at this point in the experience that says they have to see that now? And through that, we actually end up cutting a lot of stuff out. So apply that same level of rigor to your site. Cut as much out as you possibly can. Next. And again, as you can see here, I'm being mildly repetitive, but it's important to say this. Optimize for one thing at a time. Now, that's not just web design, that's focus and digital strategy and everything else. Most companies, most nonprofits, most organizations die for lack of focus. They drown in metrics. They don't starve for them. There's too much data coming in. They don't know what to do with it. The key focus of a really good manager is coming up with a very small number of things that your team can optimize for at any given time. I've led engineering and product teams of some of the best folks I've ever worked with, and no matter how skilled they are or experienced they are, they can really only do 1, maybe 2 initiatives at any given time. If I give them the kitchen sink and I'm like, do these 6 things, do these 7 things, it's making it very unlikely that they will be successful in doing that. So pick a very key metric and focus on it. Are newsletter signups important for you? Is it donations? Is it volunteering? Is it events? What is it? Pick that one thing. And then while the other things may seem very, very important as well, cut them out. Focus on as few things as effectively as possible. You can't do everything. Next, WordPress. So we have a lot of clients that we've worked with in the past. They're migrating away from Drupal or custom-built CMS systems or things that are deprecated, meaning they're no longer supported by a community of open source developers. But in reality, They end up getting handcuffed by the technology they've chosen because they choose something too complex. In many cases, you don't even need a web vendor. You can go and create a WordPress site, and there are YouTube videos that'll walk you through how to do it. You could do it in a day. You could pick a theme off of a online theme eco or marketplace like Novato Market, where there's millions of WordPress themes you can look at and choose for nonprofits, for businesses, for e-commerce flows, for everything. And you can have a site up and running and modify it yourself in a pretty short period of time. You may not even need a web vendor. Now, in some cases you do. In some cases you need someone to modify those Word templates for you and create custom designs and implementation, and also walk you through the process for what's ideal, but you may not. So consider using something like WordPress and doing it yourself. Also consider using WordPress over other CMSs if you're already working with a vendor. So someone recommends Drupal, I would almost categorically say don't use Drupal. Drupal is an older web standard and series of tools. It's not being supported or used as actively as they are anymore. So for me, when I'm choosing a code base to build a new application for a new company, I don't want to reinvent the wheel. I want to pick something simple, well documented, and easy to hire for. WordPress, there are a million WordPress developers out there that work for very cheap. Drupal is a little bit harder to find. Custom CMSs are much more difficult to find and much more expensive. So WordPress has an amazing ecosystem. And then on top of that, there are just a ton of plugins that you can add that give you very complex functionality in your site without you really having to do anything. So if you need an interactive map, there may be a WordPress plugin for that. If you need a calendaring and scheduling function, there's probably a WordPress plugin for that. If you need a login so someone can log in and see a protected part of your site, there's a WordPress plugin for that, versus paying an engineer to build it from scratch. That's the beauty of WordPress. So I'd consider it, I'd learn up on it, I'd watch YouTube videos, but definitely pick things that are easy for you to find other people to help you work on. That's the key. Now, lastly, one of the things I would recommend you do to kind of uncover whether or not you're committing some of the 10 above, some of them may be obvious, some less so, do a UX audit of your site. This is something that we often do for clients for free as part of our kind of onboarding to get people to understand some of the things that they can do to better improve their site, but you don't need us to do that. You can do it yourself. Consider looking at tools like usertesting.com, where you can put the URL of your site up and then have people run 5-second tests. You can do them for about $50 a pop. We use these tools and we do consulting engagements as well. Usability Hub is another. They both have different pricing. I think user testing is a little bit more reasonable. Usability Hub has more and complex testing. Also, ask a friend. It's amazing how often we don't solicit negative feedback on tools we created. We just park them and don't think about them. We don't want to hear bad news. We don't want to hear rough opinions, but you should be soliciting negative feedback all the time. And lastly, and believe it or not, I used to do this all the time. You have a friend that has a kid, put the thing in front of the kid and just see what the kid does with the site. Children have a very weird and unstructured way of looking at user experience. If they can't figure out where to click, then in a lot of cases, your site may not be great, or it may not be created correctly. That's why one reason on homepages above the fold, designers will often use contrasting big, bold CTAs, because even if you can't read the text, you want to click that button. So often having a child run through it can give you a lot of clarified view of what the site is actually good at or what it's not good at. So that kind of rounds up a lot of stuff. I know we had kind of a lightning round here, but I wanted to provide you with a little bit of contact information if you have questions about sites that you're running. Again, want to encourage everyone, go check out CrowdPack, our sponsor for this podcast or for this webinar. They're an amazing organization and definitely worth looking at, especially in our current political climate. There are very few companies doing stuff like them. Check out our site. You can reach out to me directly, alex@joinlincoln.org. I'm the founder of our consulting practice and I run a lot of our client engagements. So happy to answer questions or point you to folks in our team who are experts. Our goal, again, is to be a nonprofit, a 501c3, with the aim of building capacity for nonprofits doing this kind of work. So if we can help out and point you in the right direction, and even if we're not a good fit for you all from a vendor perspective, where we don't need a vendor, we're also happy to help. If you go to deploy.joinlincoln.org, you can learn more information about the things that we're doing. Again, that's deploy.joinlincoln.org. There's also an online knowledge sharing portal that we have, which is telegraph.joinlincoln.org, where you can see a lot of the data that you have today here, as well as evaluations of tools that you may want to use for your sites and your organizations. There's just a lot of great resources there, so check that out too. So we really appreciate you spending some time, I'm sure on a busy Wednesday, to walk through some of the stuff. Hopefully it's been helpful and it starts the conversation internally for some of these things. But feel free again to reach out to us if you have any other questions. And looks like Aaron's getting a phone call. Aaron, do you have anything else to add?
Hold on, I'm trying to stop presenting. There we go. I think we should leave it. You know, if anyone has any questions, they can post in on the YouTube live chat. But in that time, I was gonna say that is there any sort of bonus one? So like top 11 versus top 10.
Ooh, let me check here. There were a bunch that I didn't put in. Um, let's look here. Bum, bum, bum.
And like one comes to mind for me would be being opposed to risk. So then, like, you know, there's a natural, rather than viewing it as a means of doing experimentation or just finding out some truisms or something possible about your audience, you just automatically say, well, no, that you just put it off the table.
Yep.
Versus the ways you actually discover innovation, the way you actually can see how to reach people better is often to take those risks and view it as an experiment versus just not even including it.
Yep. That's a really good one. One that I wanted to put in there that I didn't because it's a little more complex, but um, if you want people to donate on your site, expect that they need to see that donation call to action a couple times before they consider it. So when LinkedIn was getting founded and they wanted people to join the network, I knew the head of engineering at LinkedIn at one point, or one of them, he basically said that people needed to be invited to LinkedIn at least 8 times before they actually joined. So in that situation, they needed to see it multiple times. So if you put a call to action up on your site, don't expect that the first time people see it, they're going to do it. You have to hit them through multiple channels, multiple times before they're likely to take that action. So consider it's not just about the button. It's not just about clearly communicating. It's about driving traffic repeatedly to that one page where they're able to do that through emails, through event messaging, through all kinds of things.
So one
That's a
question
good
that
one.
came in is, how would you design a nonprofit website that's tailoring to two very different main audiences? For example, you're trying to target college students, but also your donors are significantly older.
Yeah. So I would have separate experiences for each one of them if they are really that different of a use case. So it may be in the global navigation at the top. It's like, hey, if you're a student, if you are a potential donor or whatever you call them, and have them go to different pages. The homepage, I have seen some organizations bifurcate the homepage. So in that like kind of hero image that comes above the fold, there's like 2 different pathways. Like, hey, if you're a college student, click here. If you're a so and so forth, click here. And that takes them to a dedicated page that walks them through all the things that they need to hear. I've seen that done a couple times. I haven't seen it done well a lot, but there are some examples online of that. Especially SaaS companies do that kind of thing, or double-sided market companies. So if you look at like an eBay or an Amazon, there's an experience, or Uber even, there's an experience for being a driver and then hailing a ride. On Amazon, there's an experience for buying and then becoming a seller. Same thing with eBay. eBay is probably a better example because Amazon puts the seller functionality a little bit further back. But these organizations do it. They just create tailored experiences for each one.
Yeah, and even in those marketplace examples, they usually focus on one side of if you could view it as a market with having these two audiences, they usually focus on one more than the other. Like Airbnb, even though they originally focused a lot on attracting inventory, now they exclusively focus only on attracting consumers actually go on the trip.
Yep.
So yeah, like I agree. I can see the tension in a lot of these, and we even have the tension in some of our own products as well. But usually it's like one side is actually super difficult, and actually that's where you have most of your value. Versus the other side, supply or demand, whichever one will be drawn if you actually have that one piece.
Yeah, there's a great, to add on, there's a great Harvard Business Review case study on double-sided markets, or it's called two-sided markets, I think, which basically talks about this exact thing that Aaron just mentioned. You can read the entire thing and Google it if you're so interested. It's pretty beefy and academic, but for the kind of highlights, they say if you're building a double-sided market, meaning there are consumers and producers or sellers and buyers or funders and consumers of your service, always focus on the consumer side first. Because if you answer the consumer side, the sellers or the funders or others will come. If you have a compelling message for the mission and the value you're delivering to your end consumers, people are going to want to fund that. So you focus on that, you message that more top of mind. So if you had to pick between the two, I would say pick the people that you're serving over the people that would be donating, if that makes sense.
And the next question we have is from Nick. Can you walk through some of the basics of site analytics in greater depth? More or less, he adds like the ABCs of how to do site analytics, and like what would be like the ones you would focus on first, and like which metrics And yeah.
Yeah, that's a really great question, and it's a tough question to answer, but I'll give you kind of a couple thoughts. One is you should always start from a company perspective at a very high level goal. So let's say that your goal is, just for example's sake, you want to raise $10 million by the end of the year. So if you want to raise $10 million, you have to break that big mega goal down into components and say, okay, well, if we want to raise $10 million, how many donors do we need to make that happen? Okay, we need 2,000 donors. We need, 20 donors that are really high value, and then we need 18 or 1980 that are less like high value, right? That are doing like lower donations but higher volume, that kind of thing. And they say, okay, well then that's two strategies. Let's focus on the crowdfunding aspect. Well, then we need to break that down. And we say, okay, well we need to drive a bunch of traffic to a landing page for people to donate, and we expect that conversion rate on that landing page is going to be 10%. So if we need 1,980, or let's just say 2,000 donors, and it converts at like 10%, which is a really high conversion rate, then we need 2,000 divided by 10%, which is however many donors. I'm terrible at math right now. I think that's 200,000, right? You're kind of breaking back from your mega goals down into goals that are meaningful for your strategy. So you're defining success based on what your mega goals are being broken back. So that's A. So I'd always say whatever you frame your metrics in, start with your high level goals that are strategically relevant to your organization, then break them back all the way through to web analytics. So that's first. The second is on the web analytics side, generally, I would say there are different classes of analytics. There are vanity metrics that give you high level understanding of what's going on your site. Those are page views and unique users. Those are two huge vanity metrics. Page views, or also in some cases called sessions, are just people opening up your browser and they're there for, I think, more than a couple seconds, whatever Google defines it as, 0.5 seconds. Then there's unique users, which are the number of unique people who are actually coming to your site, and that's separate. So those are separate measures that are at high vanity level. And then I would say at another high level, you'd want to understand the distribution of traffic through your site. So what pages are getting the most traffic, what links are getting clicked, how are they performing? Because that tells you just how much people are vibing with the things that you have. But the real kind of winning side of Google Analytics, or using it correctly, is doing two things. One is cohorting your users. That's like kind of a high level of using analytics. That's understanding different groups of users from different places. So that may mean our donors are a group of users, and we cohort them and we understand what their users or their site traffic looks like. And we can cookie those users. We can understand who they are. That may mean new versus returning users, and I'm cohorting them based on that. That may mean so once I cohort them, I'm saying, okay, what is the pathway that I need a new user to take? I need them to sign up for the newsletter or do something else, which then begins to get into goal completion. So that's another thing that Google Analytics does really well. So you can set goals inside the site. Maybe it's newsletter sign up, donation sign up. And again, Google documents all this really well. You can go on YouTube and find videos of how to set goals up, but that lets you know how your site is specifically performing around metrics that are important to you. So there's the high level vanity things like the unique users, the page views, the sessions, that kind of thing, which are generally not that useful for you, but they're good at a high level to understand how things are going, taking your temperature. There's the cohorting, which takes another level down, referring domain or new or returning or whatever. And then there's the goal completion that comes after that, which helps you understand whether or not you're moving towards your key organizational goals. The last thing I would say is analytics and getting good at analytics, or basically understanding it, are things that are very well documented online. Google has like a GA, or Google Analytics University, where you can take online courses that walk you through all the core elements of what's going on Google Analytics and how to use the tool. Mixpanel is another amazing resource to look at. They're another analytics company, but they have amazing amounts of public education. It just educates you on different types of analytics out there. So there's no reason you should ever have to pay to take a class in analytics, because everything is freely available online. So I'd recommend checking out a couple of those resources.
Great. So one of the other questions came in, it's more of a statement, was that they never heard of CTAs being click-through action. They always stood it as a call to action. I guess that's more of your UX sensibilities coming out. The fact, like, you click on something to go do something, right?
Yeah. Call to action, click through action. I've heard them used interchangeably. They're the same thing, just different names.
Yeah, exactly. So Alex, again, appreciate it. Thanks for making the time. Everyone, please reach out to us. Alex at Join Lincoln, Aaron at Join Lincoln. Thanks again to CrowdPack for sponsoring this. Go check them out if you are thinking about running for office or want to raise money for some campaign or cause or issue. Head to crowdpack.com. Thanks, everyone.
Thanks, guys.